Raphael Rosenblatt. He's a director of Year Up. He is a former ninth grade math teacher, is that right? Taught math in the Bronx, has a master's in public policy from Harvard, and now he is director of evaluation for Year Up. As we decided what to talk about in this conference with regard to the forgotten half and CTE, we realized that the students were not prepared for their next step after leaving high school. Rafi's program talks about a great way to bridge the gap. Let's welcome Raphael Rosenblatt.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here giving you feedback. Speaking to all of you today, as was mentioned, if I go this way, I work for Year Up, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, how we think of preparing our young adults for both college and careers. But I really want to start by telling you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, which is home to the University of Florida Gators. And so from a very early age, two things were made abundantly clear to me. First, I was going to go to college after I finished high school. And second, that I could go to any college I wanted, except for the University of Georgia. And those of you laughing probably have a sense for the depths that a father-school rivalry will go. But besides that, I didn't think much of my family's college-going expectations. College was never a question. It was a given. It was a fact. And I took that same mindset with me to my own classroom when I started teaching high school math in the Bronx. I never asked my students, who's thinking of getting a job when you graduate? It was always, where are you applying, and what are your safety schools, and when are you taking the SATs? For some students, admittedly, it was when are you retaking the SATs? And the answer was always, after you've come to math tutoring. Some of you may have been in that same boat. And then, in one of those moments that happens when you're teaching, I learned a valuable lesson from one of my students. I remember it really well. It was my second year of teaching. It was late March, and I was working with Michael, who was one of my seniors. And we had abandoned talking about that night's homework to discuss life. And I had asked him if he had heard back from any of the colleges he applied to. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Rosenblatt, I'm not sure I should go to college." And I was stunned. Not go to college? Hadn't he been sitting in my class for the last 6 months hearing how important this was? On top of that, maybe he didn't know, but we had just spent 3 excruciating days as a department going through all of our lesson objectives and aligning them around college readiness. I mean, what other options were there? Well, he told me, maybe I should just get a job. I have all this stuff going on with my family, and I don't have any money saved up. I mean, is college really worth it? And if we're serious about our jobs as educators, we really need to think about that question. I mean, the fact of the matter is, just sending people to college is not the same thing as preparing them for success in this world. The data makes that abundantly clear. Even as more and more people have gone off to college than ever before, those people are still facing the worst unemployment rate we've seen since the Great Depression. A total of 54% of young college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. More than half of our success stories, these are the people who made it to and through college, and they still cannot land jobs at the rate they should be. But as was brilliantly explained on the panel before, the issue is not that there aren't jobs out there. In fact, companies are struggling to find the entry-level skilled talent they need to fill their corporations. An estimated 14 million jobs are going to go unfilled in the next decade simply because companies can't find the talent they need. So we have people looking for jobs on one hand, and we have companies looking for employees on the other, and yet we still can't bridge that divide. So what's going on? Well, part of it is that students aren't leaving high school with the workforce skills they need. A survey was done by 4 leading education and workforce organizations, and they polled more than 430 different companies. And they asked them to rate the proficiency of the people in their companies who have high school diplomas and GEDs. A shocking 42% were rated deficient in the skills needed to hold that entry-level job. And while nearly the same amount were rated adequate, less than 1% were rated excellent. So maybe we say the answer is just get more of these people, more training, send them off to college. But that's not actually necessarily the answer either. Part of the problem is, I don't know if you've heard this, but college is expensive. Students have already taken out $1 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in order to finance their educations. And that same survey asked those companies about their college graduates and how they're performing. They asked them, what are the primary skills that your college graduates need to bring? They said the things you would expect: proficiency in written English, in spoken English, in reading comprehension, in math, and in science. And then they were asked to rate the proficiency of their college graduates in these levels. 18% were rated excellent in their written English. Sorry, 16%, can't see that far away. About a quarter in English language, another quarter in reading comprehension, 15%, 18% in math, and 15% in science. Even after 4 years of training, students are still not mastering the skills they need to excel in the workforce. And this problem is complicated by the fact that our notion of what a typical progression should be for someone is out of touch with reality. Let's do a quick poll. Raise your hand if you attended a 4-year school full-time. Okay, so let's look around. That's 90% of the room. And what do we think the national average is? A quarter. 25% of our college students are in full-time 4-year schools. The rest are balancing school and work, and they're taking increasingly longer to do so. So let's recap. We have a K-12 system that isn't preparing people for the workforce. So we tell them, take out lots of debt, go to college, and then they leave and still don't have the skills they need. And our sense of the fact that people should move from high school to college to the workforce is just not feasible for 75% of America. And the problem is that we've gotten so fixated on this idea of college or work that we've lost track of everything that comes afterwards. We've forgotten about the and. Now, there are some bright spots in the data, fortunately. Research was done in the state of Massachusetts, and they looked at teenagers who were exposed to the workforce. Either they were working themselves or they were part of career exploration programs. And these researchers compared these teenagers to their peers. On average, those young adults had higher test scores, better grades, lower dropout rates, better post-secondary enrollment rates, lower teen birth rates, and were less involved in the criminal justice system. Something powerful happens when we're able to help young adults meaningfully connect what they're learning in the classroom to everything outside of the classroom. And that's really how we think about our work at Year Up. Year Up is a national workforce and education nonprofit operating in 12 cities around the country. And we help prepare low-income young adults for careers in the corporate sector. We do that by providing them with 6 months of intensive hands-on skill training, matched with 6 months of internship at a Fortune 500 company. But I don't just want to tell you about our program. I'd like to show you a little bit, and you can hear directly from one of our students. This is a clip that was from a segment that, on 60 Minutes, and you'll be able to hear both from one of our students as well as from some of our corporate partners to understand how they think about the work that we're engaged in.
For the past 2 years, Jay Hammonds has worked at Facebook's IT department. Born to a drug-addicted mother, He was adopted as a baby by a family friend.
It was rough, but at the same time, I knew nothing different. For example, I had a cousin who, grew up in the same neighborhood as me, and he went down the wrong path. And a few years later, he was killed. And, sorry.
It's okay.
At the time, it was just normal, so I knew nothing different.
After high school, he tried college, but quickly ran out of money. He says before Year Up, he couldn't even get a job at a grocery store.
I thought that would be like a great position for me coming out of high school. And I applied 3 times and never got the job.
Doing what?
A bagger.
And that was the best you
It
could.
was the best I thought of at the time.
When he saw a Year Up flyer, he jumped at the chance.
You earn money, you get college credits, I get an internship. That was the biggest moment for me because I realized I've had potential and that taking this chance and them taking a chance on me is going to change my life. And it has.
It's no secret that Wall Street's image has been tarnished over the last couple of years.
I noticed, yeah.
But so, to what extent is this, not just for J.P. Morgan, but a lot of the firms, kind of window dressing, showing that we're philanthropic, we want to show civic responsibility?
Yeah. I don't think if we want to show it, I think we are civically responsible. We don't want to drive successful people down. You want to get people who don't have the opportunity, you want to give them the opportunity, and hopefully they become more successful.
American Express CEO Ken Chenault says Chertavian is filling a gap in the economy. There's a shortage of well-trained people in the fields of technology and financial operations.
It's a win for the urban communities. It's a win for the students, and it's a win for our company. We would not be doing this unless these students were active contributors as employees, and they more than pull their weight.
Can this be expanded on a kind of scale that would have a real effect nationally?
This is a template that I think has demonstrated real success, measurable success. And what needs to happen is the business community needs to become more aware of the success that a range of companies have had.
One of the most exciting things about working at Year Up is that stories like Jay's that you just saw unfold all the time. In truth, he's not the exception to the rule, he is the rule. And we've learned how to help thousands of other young adults achieve this same kind of success. I think about Sylvie, who heard about our program entirely by chance. She worked as a cashier at a bakery that one of Year Up's mentors frequented because he liked their brand muffins. Best in the city, he said. And he convinced her to apply to our program. And right away, we knew she was the kind of student we wanted. She was smart, she was hardworking, and she made it clear that she would do whatever it took to put her life on a new path. See, Sylvie's parents never earned more than a high school diploma, and neither of them can work. So Sylvie took this very seriously. And after 6 months of successfully interning at UBS, she was offered a job there full-time. But Sylvie wasn't simply satisfied being one of the most, working at one of the most prestigious companies in the entire world. She decided that she was going to be the very best employee they had ever seen. And that's what she did. She so wowed her managers, she was selected as one of only 2 Americans throughout the company to be sent to Zurich for a global leadership development program. Sylvie's now at Columbia University. She's studying for her bachelor's, studying Middle Eastern relations. And she still spends her summers working at the bank. And she now has a bright and promising career ahead of her. So who are the Jays and the Sylvies of the world? They're men and women who happen to be born onto the wrong side of the opportunity divide, that gap that exists in our country, that prevents people from accessing the types of educational and professional opportunities they need in order to realize their potential. Our students are men and women, 18 to 24 years old, predominantly low-income people of color. They all come to us with either a high school diploma or a GED, And while many of them tried college, they're ultimately in our program because they weren't successful there. Some dropped out because of financial hardships, others because they weren't academically prepared for the rigors of college. Part of our comprehensive admissions process involves our social workers meeting with every applicant to perform what we call a readiness assessment. They talk to our students about the challenges in their lives and start to understand what might be some of the barriers that would limit their success in the program. And they rate these different challenges in 15 different categories, including things like financial risk or family risk or whether or not our students are parents. And they use this information both to build a nuanced understanding of who our students are and what they need, as well as to start to prepare for the types of services and other opportunities we'll need to connect them to so they're successful in our program. Just to give you a sense of our class, about 40% of our students come to us with some kind of financial risk. They're on government benefits, or they work long hours outside of the program to support their families. About a third of our students come with some kind of family risk. They were in foster care or group homes, or they're the primary caretakers for a sick family member. 14% of our students are parents, 9% are homeless or transient, and 6% come to us with a criminal record. But what sets our students apart is not their background, but their motivation. Our students are hungry for these opportunities and show us the lengths they will go in order to realize their potential. I think of Stephanie, a student I worked with in New York City. She came to us, a mother of two, having dropped out of college when she got pregnant. Stephanie worked 3 different jobs in order to support herself and her children, as well as her mother, who's disabled and can't work. And when Stephanie met with our admissions team, we saw her, as we do all of our students, as an economic asset that just hadn't yet been realized by society. We didn't see her working 3 jobs as a sign of her failure, but a sign of her determination, her grit, her persistence, how hard she would work to provide for herself and her family. Stephanie's journey through our program was not easy. She was there from 8:30 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon, would leave, pick up her children, drop them with her mom. She would cook dinner, she would put her kids to bed, and she would complete her year of assignments. And then she would leave and go to Macy's, where she worked overnight in the stockroom. 5 nights a week, from 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., she worked, netting about 3 hours of sleep a night. There were many points where Stephanie nearly dropped out of the program, but somehow she managed to persevere. And today she's glad she did. She's a business analyst now at Deutsche Bank. She has retirement benefits, she has health insurance, she even has tuition reimbursement so she can pursue that CPA she's always dreamed of. And without a doubt, she has charted a new course for herself and her family. So how do we help the Stephanies and the Sylvies and the Jays achieve this? We focus on 4 different key things. We start by focusing on real, grounded education. Our students spend 6 months in what we call learning and development. They're gaining the technical skills they need in either IT or finance, as well as the professional skills they'll use to successfully navigate the corporate sector. They have classes in business communication, where they learn how to give a presentation or write a professional email. We teach them how to dress professionally, how to network, how to make small talk and shake hands. Because we know that these things, more than anything else, are the keys to climbing a corporate ladder. And while they're doing all of this, they're earning college credit through one of our academic partners. Because both college and career is at the heart of how we're thinking about serving our students. The next thing we provide are professional experiences. After 6 months of interning, our students move on to 6 months of, after 6 months of learning and development, our students move on to 6 months of internship at one of our more than 300 corporate partners. These are companies like Google, American Express, Bank of America, LinkedIn, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and Facebook. And our students aren't there just making photocopies and fetching lunch. We only place students at a corporation if they're going to work in real, serious business capacities. So when Elizabeth goes to her internship at Memorial Sloan Kettering, she's not answering phones. She's managing their data servers. She oversees their maintenance. She supports staff with data queries. She's responsible for making sure nothing gets lost or corrupted, so that Memorial Sloan Kettering can go about its business of curing cancer. And Elizabeth isn't the exception to the rule, she is the rule. And this works because we listen very carefully to the needs of our corporate partners. We know, and they know, today's interns are tomorrow's employees. So we want to do everything we can to prepare our students for the jobs that actually exist, that companies are looking to fill. The third thing we provide is guidance. Everything at Year Up is infused with this culture of high expectations and high support. That means that when my advisee, Jasmine, shows up to Year Up at 8:31 in the morning instead of 8:30, she knows she just lost $15 from her weekly paycheck. She loses this money not because we're mean, although we have been told that by students once or twice, but because she signed a contract before she started with us where she agreed to meet certain basic expectations. She said she would show up on time. She said she would come professionally dressed. She said that she would have all of her work completed. And we asked her to agree to this because we know these are the minimum expectations any employer will have of her. So when she tells me that she's late because she had to take her sister to school or because the trains were delayed, my response is always the same. Thank you so much for letting me know. As you're aware, you've lost $15 from your weekly stipend. Now let's talk about what we can do to make sure this never happens again. To some, that may sound harsh. To us, it just sounds fair. No employer will tolerate a tardy employee, and to communicate anything else to Jasmine is to falsely represent the world for which we're preparing her, the world in which she will need to compete against people with BAs and MAs and PhDs for jobs. But Year Up's high expectations are always matched by our high support. And that's the fourth component here. Sorry, it looks like the computer is about to die, so we might lose the presentation, but that's okay. Everyone at Year Up goes through the program with staff support. Every student is matched with a staff advisor, as well as a community mentor to help them navigate the program as well as the professional sector. Students have access to community volunteers who help them do things like prepare their schoolwork, or prepare for job interviews, or even write professional resumes. Thanks. Students have access to wraparound supports from our student services teams to help them with any challenges that might arise. And they have that educational stipend. They get paid weekly just for being in our program, so that they don't have to decide between either work or school. Both and. Now, obviously not all of the work that Year Up does is directly translatable to the K-12 space. But we believe after 15 years of doing this that there is a lot that we can share. A lot of what I'm about to put up here, we prepared in partnership actually with the state of Massachusetts. We were co-chairing their task force on college and career readiness. And we've authored a report that I'm happy to make available to anyone who's interested in learning more about this and seeing some of these recommendations in greater detail. But one important thing to remember is that even though this is a policy conference, this is not a policy problem, and therefore cannot be solved by policy changes alone. It requires the engagement of multiple stakeholders throughout the system in order to really make a dent in this crisis. The first thing we need to do is start to really agree on what success means. At Year Up, we spent a long time debating that for ourselves. And we now know that for us, success is when 85% of our alumni are employed or in school full-time. Success is when we hit that target within 4 months of our students completing our program. And success is when our students are earning at least $15 an hour, or about $30,000 a year, well above the poverty line and more than double what they came to our program earning. And we agreed on these definitions because our research showed that if we could help get students, springboard them from our program into one of these track careers, they were much more likely to continue to gain promotions, get wage increases, and accrue the stackable credentials that will help them continue in their careers. Once we knew what success looked like, we worked backwards to say, how do we help students get there? And we realized that our students needed 4 things. They needed to be epic. They needed to be empowered. They needed to be professional. They needed to have in-demand skills. And they needed to be career ready. And we used that epic framework to measure and understand how are we doing at helping our students achieve that big goal. We need to start doing that same thing here. We need to make sure that we have a solid definition of what that end goal looks like for students. Here's one definition that we've used before, but the most important thing is understanding what it means for students to be both college and career ready, so we can then start to set benchmarks out 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, and really ensure we're moving students towards that goal. The next thing we did is thought about how do we take our goal and implement that into our curriculum. At Year Up, our academics team spent a lot of time weaving EPIC into everything we do, so that from day 1 of orientation, we're already thinking about how are we going to get that student over the course of the year to that outcome that we so care about. The same thing needs to happen throughout states, but admittedly, tackling state-level curriculum is a pretty lofty policy goal. But we can shrink it down to the individual classroom level, because at its core, this work is about helping students connect with their learning in the classroom to the actual jobs that exist outside of the classroom. So my challenge to the teachers out there is to think about making time for 4 career experiences in your classroom. These could be things like assigning projects where students have to engage and talk with members of the professional community. It could involve things like bringing in guest speakers, or even things like finding volunteer opportunities where students start to see what it means to be in the professional space. But at its heart, it's about contextualizing that learning and helping students ground that in a deep and real understanding of what else is out there. The third thing we need to do is strengthen the ties between the various stakeholders that exist. You heard the panel talk about this, so it's great to hear that we're all on the same page. But at Year Up, we know that's so important. We cannot do this job alone. And so we work in concert with corporations, with the government, with institutions of higher learning, and with foundations. The reality is that in most places, corporations and teachers don't talk. Volunteers and parents might not communicate, and employers and students are probably not on the same page. We need to change that and encourage more dialogue between these groups. So my challenge to the administrators out there is to work to reduce the barriers that exist that limit these conversations between the various stakeholders. Now, let me kind of make that a little more concrete for you. What does that look like? It could involve developing an employer champion group where you get organizations to commit to this kind of statewide employer participation in career readiness programs. It could involve creating and publicizing toolkits and menus of opportunities for different stakeholders to take advantage of. It could involve increasing volunteer, parental, and family involvement by having multiple opportunities for this kind of engagement. Or you could even consolidate it all in one statewide database so everyone can access these types of opportunities. The fourth thing is thinking about how we better use our school counselors. And again, it's so great that the people on the panel before me really brought this idea to light. Are there any guidance counselors in the room right now, by the way? Okay, excellent. So these men and women are our single greatest weapon in our effort to promote a both-and system. They have the passion, they have the training, and they have the relationships with students already. What they don't have are more hours in the day. And most guidance counselors are overwhelmed by administrative and clerical tasks, or simply the sheer volume of students that they have to work with on a day-to-day basis. But we can take advantage of existing technological platforms to help them work smarter instead of harder. There are some great resources already out there, and again, the report that I mentioned talks about this further. But my challenge to the guidance counselors is to take advantage of these technological platforms to work with your students to help them plan 6-year plans that really focus on the both college and career piece. Working at Year Up, one of the things we quickly learned was that our sites are our single best incubators of great ideas. Because it's at the sites where students are actually engaging day to day with our staff that we have the best understanding of what it takes to increase student outcomes. So my challenge to this state, if there are any legislators here, is to think about creating and launching 10 different planning and implementation grants that are going to help develop these cohesive career readiness strategies. This not only is a great way to engage employers and other stakeholders, but it simply creates more opportunities for these kinds of programs around the state. The last thing we need to think about is how we promote the importance of these twin goals. At Year Up, we have a team called the Influence Team, who has the crazy job of trying to shift the systems that perpetuate the opportunity divide. And they do this by engaging with the individuals and institutions of power that contribute to this divide and work to change their policies, their perceptions, and their practices. We need to think about how we shift perceptions here, how we start to move away from this idea of it's either college or it's a career, and really start to rally around this both-and framework. The power of the Year Up program is that our students come to us perfectly average. They don't come knowing how to code apps. They don't come knowing how to run enterprises. They don't show up knowing how to shake hands or dress professionally or deliver a flawless memo. By all measures, our students are pretty typical. But it's in that typicalness that there lies real promise. It's because our students move from dead-end jobs to working at the most prestigious companies in the world over the short time of 1 year that I think there's real hope. Anyone can benefit from this kind of training and support and networking opportunity. And if we really start to work together, we can create new opportunities for our next generation of young adults. And we can shift away from this myth of either or and really start to embrace this philosophy of both and. Thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to use whatever time is remaining to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Really enjoyed it. I was curious about, you had all the criteria of, and it ended with criminal record. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, because it's just one of the big issues we face of if you have certain stipulations about the criminal record, and if one of them happens to be anything to do with having a record where there was a violent crime, if you accept those students or not accept them, and what are you thinking about that?
So that's a fantastic question, and in truth, that is an issue that we continue to struggle with. So let me try and answer all of your questions there. That influence team that I talked about, whose job it is to shift the systems that contribute to this opportunity divide that prevents people from connecting to meaningful career and educational pathways, that's something they're tackling. We struggle with the companies, especially the types of companies we work with, especially very large financial institutions who run background checks and will automatically screen out any of our interns who have some kind of mark on their record. And part of what we're doing is working with some of these companies to shift the way that they think about limiting opportunities. That's a big part of it. We work with some organizations who help us expunge records or close records, especially if there are incidences that occurred when our young adults were younger and perhaps not as fully developed. That's a big part of it. And part of it is also changing the way that the criminal justice system thinks about penalizing our young adults, especially our young adults of color. And that's something that we continue to try and engage on a policy front around. To your other question, we don't accept young adults who have criminal records with violent crimes. There are a couple things that we just can't serve in our program, and we acknowledge that that is one of our shortcomings and ultimately something we would love to change. But what we also can't do is make a promise to a young adult and say, if you do well in our program, we're going to get you 6 months of an internship at one of these corporations, and then not deliver on that promise. And so if a young adult comes to us who, throughout our conversations, discloses that kind of background, we work with that person to think about what are the other opportunities out there, the other programs that might be a fit for that person, and again, continue to fight for this on other fronts. But it's a great question.
Jeff Dean, I'm with the Office of Innovation for Education at the University of Arkansas. First of all, I want to say I thought this was a terrific presentation because it's presenting a terrific program, or what appears to be one. And it's really exciting to see what y'all are doing there. And I believe we touched on this briefly. Raphael and I were sitting next to each other at the same table over here. The question of how a model like this would be, if at all, it would be feasible in a setting like Arkansas. Mm-hmm. So you just take Little Rock or take Northwest Arkansas. You know, it's about 500,000 people total. You have fewer employers, fewer students. How does the matching work? And that, as well as other barriers you would see in doing this at a smaller scale. I notice the cities that you're serving right now are major metro areas. Yep. So the question becomes, how does it look different in a smaller metro area?
Yeah, another great question. So this is also something, as we think about continuing to serve our mission and working to serve increasingly more students, we've kind of maxed out on the major metropolitan cities, and we're now focusing on the more of the kind of middle metropolitan cities, a city the size of probably a Little Rock. So a couple different pieces. So let me kind of help you understand our funding model, because that's a really important piece of this. About 60% of our funding comes from our corporate partners who make a donation in order to receive one of our interns. So we work with the corporations of the size and stature that we do, because each one pays $25,000 for one of our students. And that's important because that model is not directly translatable to a kind of city that doesn't have corporations that wouldn't blink at putting out $150K for six-month interns. One of the great things about this, though, is that we're continuing to innovate. So one of the things that we started to do is run a pilot where we incubate our model inside of community colleges. And that lowers a lot of our costs and allows us to perform the same kind of work, but at a much wider scale. And that's a big part of how we're thinking about this challenge. The other thing I would say is that a lot of our framework, you know, the kind of 4 things I touched on, are not, none of that requires that you work with a multi-trillion-dollar Fortune 100 company. Those pillars of real grounded education, professional experience, strong support, high expectations, all of that can really translate into much smaller kinds of businesses and corporations who still are looking for these kinds of jobs. In fact, last night I was talking about kind of addressing this question, and I gave an example from a small town in Georgia, and there's a company there called Southwire, and it's a large manufacturing plant, and they had trouble recruiting the talent they needed because it was a small town, and the graduates from their high school weren't prepared to work the kinds of jobs that required using computers, programming, and all of these things that this manufacturing company needed. And so they started partnering with the local high school so that students are working as part of their high school days inside of the company. And it's a way for students to gain that both and grounded learning, as well as for the company to start developing the talent they need to actually fill their jobs. So while the kind of year up framework might not be directly translatable, I do believe there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn and other applications that we can move forward. All right, thank you all. This is really a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. No, it's great.
Thank you all for coming. It's been a great conference. If you want professional development certificates, they're waiting on the table. Thanks for participating. We'll see you next year.